2025 School of Health and Wellbeing Christmas Lecture. This is a lecture designed to be joined by anyone, and we're delighted you chose to join us here today. It's my great pleasure to introduce Naveed Sattar, Professor of Cardiometabolic Medicine. Thank you also to Audrey Dickey for frankly organising this entire event and many of our lives here at the School of Health and Wellbeing. Over a number of years, Naveed's work has focused on the connections between metabolic health, inequalities, and their broader implications for human health. Naveed is a professor at the University of Glasgow's School of Cardiovascular and Medical Sciences, where he has built an internationally renowned research programme over more than 2 decades. His work spans many areas, including diabetes, medications, cardiovascular disease, and inflammation, areas that collectively represent some of the greatest public health challenges of our time. But what distinguishes Naveed's research is not just its scientific rigour, but its clinical relevance and real-world impact. His contributions to understanding the safety profiles of diabetes medications, for example, have directly influenced clinical guidelines and changed how millions of patients worldwide are treated. His work on statins, cardiovascular risk in people with diabetes, and the role of inflammation in cardiometabolic disease has been cited over 100,000 times, a testament to its importance in the field. His H-index is 233. 233 papers that have been cited 233 times. This is, for want of a better word, absurd. To quote Naveed directly via an interview in the BBC, "What I'm keen to do is to write papers that correct people's clinical knowledge in a way that improves practice. Medical experts are not always keen on being corrected, especially in public, but he says he does not mind upsetting people. To quote, I care more about doing the right thing for patients. If it happens to upset certain people, that's their problem." A story goes that Naveed addressed a room full of experts from major charities and eminent professors and said, "I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but this is complete nonsense." At the very end, the chairman said, "Naveed, sit down and shut up." I happen to know from Naveed personally that this word was not nonsense, but it began with a B and ended in an O-ship. One thing that might not appear on Naveed's CV is that he's had 2 unexpected stints. One for 6 weeks in accountancy, and another as professor in Oxford was it 1 month or 2 months?
2 months.
Well, before seeing the light and returning to Glasgow. Light is probably not the word, but I digress. Either way, I think you should have returned my lead again. Naveed's contributions have been recognised with numerous honours, including Fellowship of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, Fellowship of the Academy of Medical Sciences, and prestigious Diabetes UK R.T. Lawrence Lecture. He served on editorial boards of many internationally renowned journals and regularly advises international bodies on cardiometabolic health policy. He is the current chair of the UK Government Obesity Mission, which is focused on making the UK a leader in obesity treatments. But what best characterises Naveed's approach is his commitment to research that matters. Work that doesn't just advance scientific knowledge, but improves patient care and public health. Whether he's investigating drug safety profiles, exploring novel therapies, or examining health inequalities, his research consistently demonstrates scientific excellence, a finger on the pulse, and all-round academic wisdom. Therefore, please join me in welcoming Professor Naveed Sattar.
Donald, I thought you said you were going to say 2 words, and I get embarrassed actually. I'm only, never take yourself seriously. Okay, I guess obesity is. Let me see if I can get the. Never mind. You can see the cursor, can't you? Yeah. Fair enough. Right. So obesity, I think, is obviously a major issue, and these are my exposures. So I do. I get a lot of flack from various people saying, "Well, you're working with industry." Well, actually, if you look at 90% of what we do in healthcare in terms of drugs, they will develop by industry. So what do you expect? I mean, so I work with industry to try and make better trials that actually ultimately improves patients' lives and helps people. So that's why we do it. We design trials, we run trials, we co-design trials, and we look at safety and various other aspects. So that's why we do it. So I'm going to start with a question because I thought I'd try and make it interactive with this. All of you are brilliant in your own ways, and you are. You might not think you are, but you are. So, and I'm also going to challenge some of you in ways that perhaps the point of this talk is to try and change some of your, perhaps your conventional wisdom. So, first question is, are we greedier and lazier now? The current generation, say even Gen Z, are they greedier and lazier than prior generations? Hands up, yes. Okay, no, just honestly, hands up, no. Okay. And the answer overwhelmingly, I think, is no. Because the thing that hasn't changed, we are not genetically any different than we were 50, 60, 70 years ago. We're exactly the same. The genes have not changed. What has changed? So in the 1970s, there might be a range of genes that dictate appetite. There are some people in here who have an appetite, which means when they see food, they will eat it. A Labrador type genes. Okay? You know what that means? You do. I have a friend who have a very eminent an anaesthetic colleague who says, I've got Labrador genes in me. And I say, well, I can't have to eat it. There are others who have got very good appetite control. And 1970 or 1950, that didn't matter so much because there was far less food around. But what's changed? Our genes haven't changed. None of this has changed. It's this. The environment and the way we live our lives has completely changed. Completely and utterly changed. And there's other things going on, and actually there's some very clever people in this room that I'm hugely respectful for, and I wouldn't even, but they know who they are. And actually, they might even be called handsome sometimes, but I should. David, I'm just on. I wouldn't be. And ecology as well. And all of you are very bright. I mean, so the other thing is, life circumstances also dictate obesity. So if you live in the east end of Glasgow as opposed to Pearson, you're twice as risk of having obesity. Twice as risk. It's not even a little bit. It's double. And in some places, it might be 2 to 3 times, depending where you live. And that's getting worse. It's getting worse. Now, back in 1940, obesity rates, I estimated, were about 2%, 1980, 6%. So they haven't really risen much by an absolute 4% in 40 years. But over the last 45 years, we're now at 30% obesity. Almost 1 in 3 people living with obesity, which is, it's just, that's what it is. So this is not about willpower. Obesity is not, the genes haven't changed, it's the environment. We have to change the environment. But that's not easy to do. And the phone, I put the iPhone as well. The iPhone is making the environment much more obesogenic as well. You look at laughing at night, it affects our sleep, screen time, adverts, It's getting worse. It's not getting easier. And for those of you who are old enough, and I'm old enough, and Donald, when you were born, 1980, you weren't even born, you even thought about it. But 1981, this packets once a week, it cost 2.5 pence actually at that time. Or maybe not quite, but we had 1 packet of biscuits when I was growing up, and that has to last us a week, the whole family. No Cokes, yogurts, fast foods. The only thing in fast food was a chip shop, nothing else. And many of you recognise this. All meals were, eaten at home. I mean, I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing, that's just what it was. Fast food outlets just didn't exist. And we walked everywhere, far a third of the number of cars, roughly speaking. Life was completely different. It's changed. And this is a product of industrialization and advancement. But the consequence is, if you go down that pathway, then if you make life too easy, guess what? We're less active. If you make too many calories in society, guess what? We overeat, and that's what happens. And in fact, here's an average street in the UK. Actually, that's in America. You can recognise KFC and what that is. Look at that street, and then all the stuff. And then in a paper I wrote with Mike Lee and Robert Lawrence Brewer, who I think some of you recognise, George Alberti, Sir George Alberti. So I put this in the paper. I edited the BMJ season obesity. At that time, I started to think what is provided is what is eaten, and what's provided has to change. And I think that's now true. If we make bucket loads of food and able to sell it cheaply and big portions, guess what? We'll bloody well eat it. And guess what? The food industry makes huge profit. And are they going to change their behaviours voluntarily? I don't think they are. The same with the drinks industry. That's just what it is. Of course, the other big issue, of course, sugar, fat, and salt are much cheaper nowadays. So if you can make fast foods which contain more of these things because they're tastier and you can package them with preservatives, that's what you will do as a food industry. You'll just do that because you can make much more profit. Whereas if you want to make fruit and veg, something fresh, it costs a lot more money, so it's less profit. And 80% of the salt is in processed foods. This guy called Ansel Keys, some of you know he's a famous epidemiologist. He wrote in 1949, an epidemic under the right economic and social circumstances, obesity from overeating will be a dominant nutritional problem. And he predicted that in 1949. And he was right. That's where we're at. And it's not just us, it's the whole of the UK, the whole of the world is going up in obesity. We happen to be probably the biggest country in Europe that's the highest levels. There's a few others that smaller equivalent, but we are our food infrastructure is closer to the US than it is the rest of Europe, and we do things. Again, this is where it is. Right, another couple of questions. Which conditions are more common with obesity? Anybody want to name one or two? Just shout out.
Diabetes.
Yes. Anything else?
CVD.
Heart disease. Anything else? Cancer. Schizophrenia. Maybe once you've got schizophrenia. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah. Okay, so I'll come on to some of them. But actually, psoriasis. You think about psoriasis?
Yeah.
Psoriatic arthritis. Yeah. Preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, hypertension, intracranial, just multiple gout, lots of conditions, knee pain, osteoarthritis, and you go on and on and on and on. In fact, it affects nearly every specialty. When does average weight peak? Is it 50? It goes up and then it starts to come down. Is it 50, 60, 70, or 80? Anybody know?
40.
40? That's not, I wish it was 40. Well, actually, it probably was 40 in 1940. It's nowadays, I reckon it's about 70. And it used to be 50 to 60 20 years ago. So it's going up and up and up. Because we in a sense, we kept people alive longer, which is great. But again, with more food, there's more overweight. Which groups have the highest risk of, when I mean highest risk, that's not the right expression. In which groups is obesity going up fastest? Young, old? Any ideas? Young, yeah. Women or men? Which women? Now, any ethnic groups? Afro-Caribbeans, actually, and Asians as well. Right, so here's a summary of lots of this. Is a paper I wrote. I don't write many good papers. You never call your own papers good. You just put them out there and see what happens. But we're at this point now in life that treating chronic diseases, and this is a tough ask, and many of my colleagues don't like me saying this, but it's true. Treating chronic diseases like heart failure, or a certain type of heart failure, without tackling obesity promotes multimorbidity. That basically means we're at the point where obesity is so prevalent in certain conditions that if we don't treat the obesity, but for example, lower the cholesterol even more, yes, that person might live a bit longer, but they're going to develop even more conditions because they live longer, because they're living with obesity. We're at that point, which is a very tough thing to say. And on that paper, I have the world's leading heart failure expert, John McMurray, who works next door to me, and he's from Northern Ireland, but he's brilliant. Ian McInnes, our boss. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say how many. He's a good friend of mine. Rheumatology. The point is, heart failure, rheumatology, endocrinology, nutrition. So lots of people. So back in 1970, if you developed heart failure, this is your trajectory of weight. You often developed at a lower weight because smoked more and there was less statins and blood pressure. And you either died from cachexia, i.e. you lost weight, or you had a premature heart attack. And you lived till you were 65. This is what the average characteristic of the West Scotland man. LDL5, 50% smokers. That's changed completely. Now in 2025, we can get the cholesterol right now. Far less are smoking, about 10%, I think. I might have got that slightly wrong. Many are on statin, blood pressure. We're able to we've stopped people dying from heart failure and diabetes and cancer and rheumatoid arthritis. So more people are living longer. They're also developing obesity faster because of less smoking in the environment. So they're living longer with more life years with obesity. And obesity affects, I'll just put it this way, it affects mechanical issues, metabolic issues, where you put your fat, mental health issues, it puts volume in the body as well. That's what happens. You think, well, actually, read all of that up. I don't believe any of that. Well, let me show you some data. This is a paper by a girl called Natalie Conrad, who's from Belgium. She also works partly for Oxford. And I think John McMurray was probably the lead. He was a senior, probably promoted this. And I helped a little bit with this paper as well. So over the last 20 years, atherosclerotic disease has come down. This is in men and women. It's been coming down. It's kind of starting to plateau now, but it's right, it's much lower. But what's going up is non-atherosclerotic disease, the things that are not to do with narrowing of blood vessels, but to do with sticky blood, so having a deep vein thrombosis, or having heart block, or developing what's known as an arrhythmia, like atrial fibrillation is going up, or aortic stenosis, which is the valve in your heart, which is a bit blocked. And heart failure initially was coming down because of less heart attacks. But guess what? It starts to go back up, even though that's coming down again. So it can't just be because of scarring of the heart, and this is obesity, and people living longer. That's what the issue is. So lots of chronic diseases are going up. So let me show you how some of these work. You can recognize some of these things: pain with obesity, arthritis, breathlessness, sleep apnea, diabetes, fatty liver disease, infertility, how people feel about themselves. I mean, all these things. And kidney disease should be there, heart failure. You can see it really affects every bodily system. But let me explain how some of these happen. So let me talk about metabolic. So basically, liver, diabetes, and maybe heart attacks as well. When you put on weight, we all have a threshold where we store weights more safely peripherally, but at some point it will start to go centrally. For me, compared to Donald, because I'm 50 years older than Donald, I'm only 5 now, actually. I'm a bit older than Donald, shall we say, but I'm also South Asian. My parents have diabetes. I don't have a good capacity to store fat yet, and I'll put it centrally. Donald needs to probably get to BMI of about 40, probably 35, before you do that. Anyway, so women's threshold is much higher. Women put much more weight before they put it centrally. Not that, that's what happens. So as you spill fat into the center, it goes into the liver, the muscles, the pancreas, and those are the key organs that affect your sugar metabolism. So fat in those organs leads to high sugar levels. It also leads to markers that I can see in the blood, your triglyceride and your ALT, which comes from the liver. And if I see high triglyceride, high ALT, a high hemoglobin A1C, and you're overweight, I know that you've got ectopic fat where it shouldn't be. Yeah, and that's what happens. At the same time, often with weight gain, more and more people now have got high blood pressure because of high weight. 25 years ago, that wasn't the case. It's now much more common. It's partly because with excess calories, you're also eating too much salt. So you have what's known as a metabolic nutrient stress, too much calories in your cells, and too much fat in various organs, and too much volume as well. And there's also this volume stress, because with more salt, you need to carry more water in the body in various tissues and various compartments, and that puts pressure on your pumps, your heart, your pipes, your blood vessels, your filters, which is your liver and your kidneys. That's what it does. You basically, and in some ways, it's almost like you've turned on the engine too much, and it's going to burn out faster. Yeah, you're just pushing it, you're stressing everything, and that's what's happening. And here's a physical example. Sleep apnea happens because some people have a propensity to put excess fat in the epiglottis. Some do it more often than not, and you're putting it in your tongue. So as you put on weight, and if you get more weight, fat tissue within your tongue, as you lie down, the tongue is heavy, it collapses, and you get sleep apnea. And guess what? Weight loss actually helps there. And then weight also affects joint pain. If you have a bit of joint pain because a bit like, say, for example, David, you don't have joint pain, but imagine you play football, don't you? And, David continues to play football as a striker, and he thinks he's Harry Kane. He's probably a bit good, actually. And he gets a bit of joint pain, and he happens to put on weight. That joint pain is going to be worse. God, it's not happening, but it's happening. It happens to a lot of people. And then infertility. Why would obesity relate to infertility? Well, partly, I wrote this paper back in 1998. It was one of my first trials with the endocrinologist. When you put on more weight, the pancreas has to make more insulin because your liver's fat to keep your sugar down. But insulin can also tickle the ovaries to make more testosterone in women. It's called a gonadotropin. It acts like a gonadotropin in some women. So you get more testosterone beyond what the cells can cope with, and that causes infertility because they don't make the eggs. Wow, isn't that amazing? And the commonest cause of infertility in young women is this condition called polycystic ovary syndrome. 75% of women have infertility because of linked obesity. And then you've got arthritis. So the things, I wrote this paper with my wife actually, because she's an occupational therapist in the Royal, and she's telling me lots of our patients are young, BMI 40, can't even get out of the bath because they've got joint disease. Yeah, and that's causing, and then once they can't get out of the bath, they stop work and they can't help the children, and it's a spiraling thing. So the reason, what we've discovered is people with psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis are putting on weight faster. Why? Because they've got joint disease, their activity goes down faster, but because they live in the same environment, because they're burning less calories, the amount of calories they eat is more rapidly leading to weight gain as well. Plus, obesity leads to more skin disorders by mechanisms we don't understand. Plus, when they get obesity, the drugs that we give them, like the biologics, don't work as well. They get more pain and fatigue, and the biologics don't help with fatigue because that's the obesity. And then their physical functioning decreases, their work absence increases, their mood and motivation decreases, and then they get the diseases as well. And it's this absolute issue. 30 years ago, the average BMI in a patient with psoriatic arthritis was about 25, I think. Nowadays, it's about 30. Same in heart failure, it's gone up. Same in kidney disease, it's gone up. And nearly every clinic you go, BMIs are going up. So, wow, that's, it's a lot to take in, and I'm kind of slightly over belaboring some of this, and and maybe you can have a discussion. So we have this wave of multiple long-term conditions in middle age and elderly. You go to the Royal, the average patient is on about 15 drugs when they're admitted. The average age is probably about 75. The average BMI is probably about 28 to 30. And we also have an emerging wave of young type 2. In the UK, under 40, in the year 2000, we had 1,000 people diagnosed with type 2 diabetes under the age of 40, because it's an old disease. Anybody guess how many we have now? Give me a number. 1,000 and 2,000. Give me a number. Donald? Give me a number. What was it? 1,000 and 2,000?
2,000.
2,000. Yeah. 200,000. 200,000. Exactly. Yeah. And it's not anyone's fault. I'm not blaming anybody for any of this, right? Individuals, it's just what it is. The issue is the epidemiology is changing so fast. We've been slow to interpret. We've been so focused on keeping people alive longer. Innovation here, innovation there, innovation. Meanwhile, the food epidemic, the food environment, the social environment, lives are getting easier. We complain about cost of living, but actually we've all got a bit more money than our parents did in terms of cost of living. So, and there's more cars and so on and so on. And then I get involved in a lot of the media stuff, and sometimes I don't need to, and then I get bad articles like this. And I don't know if you read this. Basically, I got completely annihilated by this lady called Liz Jones. I don't know who she is. And it was about portion size. We wrote a paper with my wife and my daughter saying portion sizes should come at least 2 different portion sizes. Because every time my wife and daughter, we were in restaurants, my wife got a huge porridge, which was about 1,000 calories. And she felt guilty, couldn't eat it, so she overate. Because she thought, that's all food waste. We actually need different portion sizes. Anyway, the food industry's not going to do that. Anyway, I got slated by this woman and said, how dare we? She completely, they didn't even read the paper, they completely, So this is the next part. How do you think? Right? Yeah, right. Okay. So the second part. So what I've told you so far, obesity, I think personally, I'll be here to say some of my colleagues and anybody who here is probably the most important modifiable risk factor for people developing multiple long-term conditions, chronic conditions. And I don't think anything else comes close. The only other thing that would change it, which is what none of us wishes, is to reduce life expectancy by 10 years. I don't think any of us want that, do we? No, I don't want that. I would quite like a little bit one, actually. But that's, plus it's suffering. It impacts on work, social care, mental health, the rising disparities by social class, sex, ethnicity, and particularly the elderly. Why do I say the elderly? Because if you think about it, if you have a BMI, and again, this is not to blame, just a reality. If you're young and you've got more muscle mass and you've got more younger organs, you're able to cope with higher BMIs. Whereas if you're older and you've got slightly dodgy joints, your heart's a little bit deranged anyway, your blood vessels are a bit stiffer, your kidneys getting a bit deranged. If you put on more weight, that is more rapidly going to lead to problems. because you've got far less buffering capacity, which is why we're getting this epidemic in middle age. And actually, if you go to the Royal Infirmary, any ward, any admission, I dare you to come along with the A&E, right? Come and see what happens. The average patient is much older and heavier than whatever. It's not their fault. It's just what it is. With 15 tablets with 6 conditions. That's what That's what it is. So, and I wish we weren't here. I wish we were back to the 1970s before Donald was born. Not because of Donald wasn't born. With ABBA and Shwadi Wadi and some we buy this. We don't need any of these bloody drugs. But actually, I reckon we're in this position in medicine. We're kind of slightly buried our head in the sand. We're fiddling while Nero fiddles while Rome burns. I think that's where we're at. We've got these innovations in X, Y, and Z. We've got to do this and that. Wait a second. Yeah, okay, we can keep people alive with this other condition. I won't say what it is. I don't want to develop any condition. For an extra 2 weeks with this really brilliant drug that costs 200,000 and keep. Well, wait a second. What about all these? We need to change the environment. We absolutely have to. I'm not sure that's ever going to happen. Antibodies, actually. Right. So then we come to these innovations, and you can see why they're needed now. What you think about them will be interesting, and I'm open. We're open. We develop these things. When we're having our mince pies, it's going to reach our gut, and the gut is going to, in one of the cells called L cells, they're going to start making more of this GLP-1 thing called glucagon-like peptide. It will help the pancreas stimulate more insulin to put the sugar in the right places in your tissues, just to save it for when you're running around. Okay, because you don't need it when you're eating a mince pie, because the mince pie is going to give you that sugar. So you want to store that sugar for later. So the GLP-1 helps. The body makes that. What we didn't realize is the GLP-1 is also signaling to the brain that you're going to start to feel full. What the companies did was, well, let's make some of these drugs to try and enhance the amount of GLP-1 to keep sugar down. And it works. Wow. It does work. It's another diabetes treatment. And then they thought, wait a second. We did all these trials in heart disease. We then discovered that these drugs lower the risk of heart attacks. I know this is a bit complex. I'm not even going to go through it. And some of these drugs lowered weight up to about 4 kilograms. Wow, that's kind of interesting. I was involved with a couple of these trials. It's great. And he thought, well, what happens if we up the dose? Can we get more weight loss? And the answer, actually, I'll skip that. The answer was yes. If we get more of these GLP-1 drugs, so, it's basically mimicking you eating a meal, but you're not eating a meal, you're getting a drug. It hits the brain, it reduces appetite, you eat less because you feel full sooner. It controls your cravings and your food noise. In addition, it slows how fast your stomach empties, so you can't eat as fast, and it kind of makes you eat slower and more carefully as well. So there's a couple of things that happen, but the net result is less calories in, less calories in, and over time people eat less, and then not even over time, very rapidly people eat less and they lose weight, and that's what's happened. In addition, by luck, it happens that they affect blood vessels. We didn't expect this, that they lower the formation of blockages in your arteries of your heart and your brain and your legs. Modestly, not the same as statin, but they still do it. Wow, we didn't expect that. And also, we got lucky that they seem to dampen inflammation by ways we just simply don't understand. But the weight loss is the big thing, and plus, of course, improved sugar control. And this is how much weight we can lose. So before the diabetes drugs were about 4 or 5 kilograms, and suddenly we've got this thing called Wegovy, 14% weight loss, and Mounjaro, which you've heard about, its proper name is tirzepatide, 22% weight loss. Wow. And remember, these have only come in the last 5 years. We haven't had them. And listen, how long have we had statins for? We've had statins since 1992, 30 years. They were expensive at the beginning, and then they come down in price once they come up here. But so, last 5 years. This is what it looks like. I was involved in this trial. Weight loss, look how fast it comes down. By 36 weeks, 20% weight loss. By 88 weeks, 25%, which is about 27 kilograms on average, 4.5 stone a quarter stone, or 10 BMI units, which is substantial. If you stop the drug and you randomize them back to placebo, yes, weight goes back up. It doesn't go back up immediately. It takes even over a year. They're still only put on half the weight that they had lost. So it's not a disaster by any means, but clearly That's on average. There are people who go up faster, people who go up slower, and so on and so on. And what's the evidence in trials now? You think, well, that's all great. Tell me about the trials and the safety. Well, in people without heart disease, they lower the risk of heart attacks by 20%. In people with sleep apnea, a 15% improvement, so that half the patients can go up a machine called CPAP. In kidney disease, about a quarter of lowering of important kidney outcomes. Knee pain with semaglutide, about a third of a reduction in the pain of your knees because of the physical. These are physical effects, that's atherosclerosis, and these are metabolic. And an improvement in substantial reduction in fat in the liver and the amount of scarring in the liver. But perhaps the most important, I think, is this one. 93% reduction in the risk of developing diabetes if you've got pre-diabetes. I just want you to think about that, 93%. I've now written a paper that says, with a guy called John Bruce, who wrote the guidelines for the US, actually for the ADA, that actually in 5 to 10 years' time, we will be using these drugs at diagnosis of diabetes to be able to delay that diabetes, reverse it for about 10 to 15 years. We'll push it back. Because type 2 diabetes, for most people, is a disease of excess of tropic fat. That's what it is. That's what it is. If you stay on the drug, you keep the weight off. If you keep on the drug, you can keep the weight down, at least over 4 years, that's what we know. Let me explain the diabetes thing. It's not just about weight loss, so because the drugs, I've told you already, the GLP-1 directly makes more insulin, which keeps sugar down. But what these drugs do, in addition to doing that, because they help a lot of weight reduction, and if you picked it up, this is called, I've been doing this for years, I know this stuff really well. But what happens is, with diabetes, when you get it, it's because the liver, in part, most people who've got diabetes got too much fat in the liver. That MRI, when it's all shiny and green, tells you that the liver fat is about 18%. It should be about 1 to 2%. And when the liver's fatty, it makes sugar beyond what the body needs. So it's not about eating sugar, it's about weight. So what happens when you lose the weight? The liver fat goes down from 17% down to about 2 to 3%, and that liver then is much more responsive to the insulin that you've also made. And then you get a doubling of reduction in sugar levels. That's what happens. Both direct and indirect. Blood pressure. This is the low-calorie diet. Mike Lean led this talk called Direct. David and I think the SM here. So David led a trial called Redirect in long COVID. We can maybe talk about that at the end. I think it's an under-record. It's a really important trial. I really need to talk again. But you probably know what I'm talking about. But look how fast weight goes down with the diet, but look how fast it goes down with the drug. Really, really fast. And that can't be just weight. It's because you're cutting salt intake rapidly as well as calories. So, in summary, we have these drugs, which have both direct effects on the blood vessels and diabetes and kidney, independent of weight loss, but they also have big weight loss effects that adds benefit on the liver, sleep apnea, arthritis, heart failure, I haven't shown you, diabetes, blood pressure, kidney benefits. These are the conditions that many people now have. Plus, it helps people feel better. They're less likely to have fatigue. They have increased fitness. And they generally, in many instances, people generally feel happier because they've got more energy and less disease and more motivation to do things. And they've got less food noise. And they're able to think about other things beyond having that food noise, is what I've seen with some of our patients. So that's good, that. But they're expensive, aren't they? What about side effects? When you first start these drugs, now you think, God, that looks like a lot of side effects. But look at the percentages. Yeah. This is not 100%, this is 10% of people. So 95% are generally okay. Even initially, this is the prevalence of nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. That's the kind of highest dose. So, and it can be quite, moderate in some people, very small, severe. But it usually tailors down quite rapidly over a few weeks down to about 4 You'll still get some people who continue the drug even though they've got mild nausea, because on general they're happy to take it because they feel okay. But 95% generally are fine. So about 1 in 20, I think, continue to have problems. What about pancreatitis? Well, do you believe the observational data and media? Oh, Mr. Smith started on a drug and 2 weeks later he got pancreatitis. It must be the drug. No, that's not how we do science. The best way to get to the truth is a randomized placebo-controlled trial. That gets you to treat. And we have 106,000 patients randomized into these trials. And what do we see? No increased risk in pancreatitis. If you got the drugs versus getting a placebo, nothing, not one difference. Okay. There is an increase in what's known as gallstones, and there's an increase in some stomach issues, which is what's known as gastroesophageal reflux disease, which you see a lot, my colleagues see a lot in primary care. But again, that's linked to the fact that when you first start the drug, it's making you eat less. And if you don't adapt quick enough to the fact that your body needs to eat less, if you don't change your habits and you're eating too much for the way that the stomach and the brain are responding, guess what? You get a bit nauseous. So you have to slow. And that nausea and vomiting rapidly diminishes in most people. Particularly if we start low with the drug and go slow, it comes up far less to begin with. Start low, go slow is the mantra for these drugs.
What about muscle mass?
Well, you do lose muscle mass, but guess what? If I lost weight by diet, I'd lose muscle mass. If I lost weight with bariatric surgery, I'd lose muscle mass. And if you plot them all in a line, it's a straight line. Why? Because heavier people need more muscle, and lighter people need less muscle. So I'm not sure that this is anything pathological. This might just be a physiological change. What happens? I don't know. We need more data. And we published one of these trials in this area. So the lower fat, and the important thing is the lower amount of fat, much more than muscle, but 3/4 is fat mass, 1/4 muscle. And the randomized trials show that you get improved quality of life and symptoms even in people with elderly living with heart failure, even over 75, and even if they lost more weight, they feel better. And remember, they also, you hear they describe food noise, that want to eat is going down in lots of people. And I think the food noise means that the consequence could be that if you get less food noise, people may well be, particularly when they've lost weight, they may well be more receptive to doing physical activity than they were before. They may well be more receptive to trying different things in their diet. And we need to build upon that to try and improve things. Again, I don't want this to be the answer, but again, this is where we're at. And this would be the typical patient in my clinic. Mr. Smith, he's got high set because his blood triglyceride is higher than the GP. My colleague, it's usually around about, it's not usually 7, usually about, in some cases 12, 13, it doesn't really matter. Or, but if you look, his BMI is 34, his blood pressure is 141, despite being on 2 blood pressure tablets. And then I check his hemoglobin A1, well, my goodness, he's almost got diabetes, he's got pre-diabetes, 48 with diabetes. And look, his liver test is screaming, oh, he's got fatty liver, it's probably fatty liver disease because he's got high sugar, high fat in the blood, which is coming from liver fat and high BMI. So these are all the signs of ectopic fat. So obesity, hypertension, high dyslipidemia, heading towards diabetes, fatty liver disease. What would we do traditionally? Give him a lipid lowering, treat his blood pressure, measure some biomarkers to do with this, and tell him to lose weight. He comes back 2 years later, he's put on even more weight. He's now got diabetes. He's still got fatty liver. Whereas actually, if I could treat and help the BMI, I could improve all of those things at the same time. And the trials tell me that. Yeah. You might then, if he continues the same way, also get osteoarthritis 10 years down the line, be on 10 medicines, be off work, develop mental health issues. That's kind of the issue as well. Now, there's the rub. This is great. Give it to more people. I got, some people say, we should give it to everybody in the NHS. Well, no, come on, wait a second. Don't have enough trial data. We've just got to be careful. Is this the right thing philosophically for the world? What about kids? What about pregnant women? No. And what about the costs? There are probably about 1 million people who could benefit from this drug in Scotland. 1 million. That would cost us cheapers. God, I can't even brains. It's 2,000. So that would cost us £2 billion a year, which we don't have. Okay. Well, and even if it's $500,000, it's £1 billion a year. That's a lot of money. We don't have that. If we go and drill for more oil, we're not getting it. And actually, we're not going to save £1 billion every year at the moment. It's not going to happen like that way. Because a lot of people who will get better initially, they may not have got the disease till 10 years down the line. And even if they got that disease, well, we can treat it with a blood pressure tablets that cost pennies, or statins that cost pennies, or So it's at the moment we're treating very high risk. We're licensed to treat BMI 30 or 27 plus a disease. In England, is where you're absolutely allowed to treat is BMI 40 plus 4 conditions. In Scotland, 38 plus 1. Even there, my colleagues in Lanarkshire are seeing 400 patients a month, and they're able to treat maybe half a dozen. We just don't have the money. So the usage in the NHS is probably about 10%. I think in Scotland it's about 16,000 people. The usage in private care is 300,000 in Scotland. People are buying it. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because they're saving the NHS money, ultimately, and they're feeling generally well. We can discuss that as well. The thresholds will come down as the costs come down. And my last few slides is that this is where we're at. We're treating people at the very highest risk. We could intervene earlier. There's tablets coming fast as well. And the big issue is, what about kids? I'd love if these drugs help change the environment so that we can actually don't need to give kids where the obesity is rising fastest these drugs, because that just would be a disaster, wouldn't it? It doesn't make sense to me at all. Companies are bypassing NHS, direct to consumer, 300,000 buying it, many not at high risk. Huge public health intervention. Let's discuss it as well. And I've only got three more slides actually. I've got just that. You've already heard. There's hundreds of drugs in the market. I'm involved in 7 outcome trials or weight loss or outcome trials. There's a drug that's coming as a tablet. Hopefully, it'll get to license next year. There's a drug that's coming once a month injection. There's different molecules, different mixes of drugs that we not just affect GLP-1, they affect 2 or 3 other molecules either in the brain or they help burn up fat. There's a whole range of things coming. So in 5 years' time, we might have 7 or 8 drugs licensed for obesity, not just 2 or 3. So here are my final reflections. Weight is the main modifiable driver of multiple long-term conditions. The reason we've got obesity is the environment. It's not to do with, it's not anyone's fault. Weight loss medicines, or they're called incretins. In future, I expect they'll be called nutrient suppressing hormones or stimulating hormones. Help many withstand the environment because they help. They're like chemical shields to the environment. They help big weight loss. Most of the gains that people get in most diseases is weight loss, but fortuitously, the drugs also seem to have direct effects on sugar, on the kidneys, and the heart in ways we didn't anticipate. The safety profile is generally good. There are GI side effects. We're getting better at how to manage them. There are other little bits of things that seem to be coming up, but we need to look at them more carefully. But even if they do, the benefits in the vast majority overwhelm the harm so far. Hundreds of drugs are in development. I hope in the end that they help improve the food environment so that actually we don't need the drugs in 50 years' time. And I hope we can work together with public health to achieve that. Of course, prevention must be the key. But there are so many people who are living with obesity, we have to treat them as well. So I'll leave you finally with my dog. Yeah, and who's probably the reason I'm lucky enough to not yet have diabetes, unlike my parents or my brother or my siblings. So there you go. Look, thank you very much, and let's have lots of questions.
That's fantastic. I feel slightly bad now that I got you a box of chocolates as a thank you. I've been wildly inappropriate. Do you have any questions for me? So we'll alternate in person with online.
And challenges as well. I love challenges. Discipline.
You talked about food noise and the reduction in you talked about the food noise and it helps with the impulses and the Labrador effect. Do you think there's any direct action on parts of the brain that deal with impulse control separately from the food noise? And
say that again, on what?
On parts of the brain that deal with impulse control, who have issues with impulse, and is there value in perhaps looking at populations where diagnoses that affect impulse control would affect eating, or is there evidence for reducing addictions, or is it going to become this panacea for many other different conditions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I like the fact that this is a little bit of pushback. We need pushback because we need to road test everything you do. Because again, when I'm involved in these trials, we look very carefully at safety, we look at side effects, and we also sometimes find unexpected benefits. So one of the benefits we found anecdotally is that people say, well, I'm drinking less alcohol. I'm also able to stop smoking. And I can tell you now that companies have started on an over 1,000 patient trial in alcohol addicted disorder. And my other colleagues want to do a trial. I spoke to them yesterday, they want to do a trial of binge eating disorder. So it may well be, but just by chance, that these drugs do affect the pathways that affect things like binge eating, other addictions and stuff. That's all good, but might there also be a downside somewhere that they also affect some of the other joys? I don't know. At the moment, I don't see it, but we need to be open. Now, the other question I think I'll maybe not answer because I don't know the answer, but there are certain foods that affect some of that incretin pathway. The food that I often talk about in terms of the best evidence we have in terms of keeping your weight down is actually fibre. And fibre does engage some of the GI system to give you more GLP-1 to help weight loss. So, so that's natural. But in terms of other pathways, I think that's beyond my expertise. But what I can say, the best treatments we have in binge eating aren't good enough outside of the drug. And the drugs seemed, and I spoke to it was a psychiatrist in King's College. She said, we've got some amazing results with these drugs. We could never have anything else. And that's just luck. Humility and serendipity.
So a question from online now. From trachoma, do we know how the weight loss drugs impact the microbiome and how this might in turn affect mental health?
I would say you might drop the microbiome, but because there was a big paper by the Zoe group in Nature, and God. Actually, that's not true. I mean, I don't know enough about the microbiome. The microbiome might well be a vehicle in the way, because it's linked to your diet, okay, and your activity. The microbiome is a reflection and a large part of your diet, but that in itself may be the way that the body, it may actually affect the efficiency of your macrophages, the efficiency of other things. I'm not sure it's linked to mental health at all. I think that's just association. I have no idea what the pathways would be. But what I do know, I'll give you a quick snippet. Diet, if you eat a diverse diet, you're going to have a richer, varied microbiome. If you eat a diet which is crisps, biscuits, cakes, sweets, your microbiome is going to be far less diverse and far more toxic. Okay? Whether it's causal, I don't know, or whether it's just a reflection, because it might be that diet's affecting your disease through other mechanisms, not your. But I have no idea. What I would say to you, and through the trials, we're just about to report that the second paper on the Mounjaro in terms of heart, our biggest trial ever, is coming out tomorrow, which I helped with, is coming in the new Mounjaro. It's an outcome trial. And we're not going to report on this, but I can tell you because we presented it, we found a big reduction in death from infections. And they saw that same thing with semaglutide and Select. What the hell's going on there? Could that be that people are eating less and better diverse, improving the microbiome that improves immune cells? Or is it the fact that you're less overweight, you're walking more, you've got less stasis in your lung? I have no idea. Yeah. So humility again, we need to do more of this stuff.
So I believe Ewan had his hand up a while ago. Then we'll come to Helen, Christmas Lecture Obesity.
Thanks, Naveed. That was fantastic. I'm Ewan McDonald at Healthy Working Lives Groups. I look after a working age population. 50% of the population over 50 fall out of work before 64. Yeah. That's a loss. The costs of all of this are completely colossal.
Yeah.
And reducing sickness and absence is an ongoing challenge. So is the health economic, are the health economics properly evaluated? We start to take on the national income.
Yeah, I can give you a brilliant answer, and that's something we should do in Scotland. Maybe there's guys here who should do this. I'll just shout, you can hear me anyway. So in England, they're doing 3 pilots of trying to get people back to work, linked to, they're using, I think, talking therapies. Are you familiar with this, David? In Yorkshire and other places, where they're trying to help people get people back to work, and because they think it's to do with lifestyle, not health. But they're doing that as a pilot because they also want Novo Nordisk to engage. Can we help people who are perhaps falling out of work because of their weight and things linked to their weight, i.e. So they've started that pilot as well, or we want to do that. So it may be something to see what they're doing in England and to do something aligned, because you're right. If somebody falls out of work, it costs the economy £20,000 a year. These drugs cost £2,000 a year. So imagine for every 20 people you get on the drug, even if you manage to keep 2 back in work, you would actually pay for the drug itself. And improve the quality of life as well. I mean, I'm not saying that's exactly the way it works. And in terms of the benefits, the cost, you're right. We are in a stage, and I want you to think about this. This is no longer about one drug that affects one outcome that we can easily measure. Heart attacks, less admissions, health economics, which, Emma, this is affecting so many other things, many of it outside of health, that we don't know how to capture. So there's tons of activity going, but we need to do much more work in that space. You're completely correct.
I think we followed on from the first question. So I'm a child adolescent psychiatrist, and I'm aware that ADHD and obesity are linked. And West Streeting is trying to convince us that ADHD is underdiagnosed. All psychiatrists know that, overdiagnosed. We all know that it's underdiagnosed. Medications for ADHD are cheap. So, I just wondered, is that something that you're...
I don't know that literature at all, to be fair. And I don't, in some conditions, we've got to be slightly careful. There's things, reverse causalities, like schizophrenia is linked to obesity. I don't know whether there's a causal element initially, but there definitely is when you're on these drugs like clozapine and other things. It affects your appetite, you put on weight. And there are now ongoing trials that Nova funded where people with schizophrenia are going to get these drugs to help them stop that weight gain. Yeah, but the pathways could all be linked to cause. It could also be there's sort of some conditions where the condition, because of ADHD, maybe the behaviour, then accelerates. Either your eating habits or your activity habits are changed so much that in an obesogenic environment that leads to obesity, and there are others. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's clear. I mean, one of the main symptoms of ADHD is impulsivity.
Yeah.
People who eat a whole packet of biscuits, they're very highly at risk.
So there you go. Yeah. And again, there are other conditions where this biological, Prader-Willi syndrome affects appetite, and Yeah.
So I have a question from online. What is the evidence in terms of social patterning of obesity, and has that increased? Because it seems unlikely those on low incomes can afford to buy new products privately.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think actually Vital and David probably could answer that better, and we should ask, I think it has worsened, but I think it's worsening, and I think COVID has been an accelerator in this, the pandemic. Vital's kind of, yeah, I think so, and I think, in some ways, the way I was thinking about COVID and the pandemic, clearly it was a stress on the entire system, but it was also a stressor. If you've got vulnerability to have poor sleep or poor activity or poor diet, COVID just accentuated that. Yeah, it just increased that vulnerability, and a lot of people put on a lot of weight in COVID. And David, we should have a comment from David. A lot of people who thought. Let me be slightly careful. A lot of people who we had in a trial that David and Emily led with long COVID, if you look back at the records, their weight went up about 10 kilograms. And when we helped to reduce their weight with the trial that the guys led, guess what? The fatigue substantially improved as well. So was it, and also with the weight gain, you get an inflammatory hit. So was it just that the vulnerability of the pandemic increased some people more, particularly those of low socioeconomic status? And then they didn't regain better habits. I have no idea. But that's my gut feeling. But again, we should see what David should have a comment. I picked on David a lot.
Yeah, I actually have a question.
Okay, all right.
Completely unrelated. I'll have a think about it. Comment later. Naveed, you have the year of government. You are also on the radio a lot. I heard you recently saying that because of the widespread use of medications like Wegovy and MJ and whatnot, that the rates of obesity in the US had gone down for the first time, in the last 20 years or so. And I think you were suggesting that actually might drive some changes in the obesogenic environment.
I'm hoping
from a consumer point of view. So my question was, do you think with the year of politicians and policymakers, are they kind of almost relying on that consumer-led change to our obesogenic environment, or is there any appetite for more of all the kind of more regulation, legislation, all the things that we know public health-wise could improve the environmental drivers?
Well, let me just shout that out, because I think, to me, I've had lots of, not sleepless nights, but just pessimism in some respect. The big problem we have now is I don't know to what extent, what percentage of our economy is the food and drinks industry? It's a big part of our economy. Right? So we can't just get it to decline rapidly because that's part of our economy. And that's why the government have never really taken legislative action, because the foods and drinks industry whisper in someone's ear saying, don't put tax on whiskey because it's going to cost Scotland, So that's the big problem. So we can't change the food industry rapidly overnight. We need to do it so slowly and incrementally. But also they need to evolve in the ways that they can make profit in other ways, I guess. And I don't know what the answer is. And I don't think even government even thought along the lines that you have, actually, David. I don't think they have. But what I would say, though, is that there's an opportunity to work with these innovations going on. See, can we actually piggyback public health stuff to accelerate that or synergize it? I don't know how that would work. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, and again, the US data, I think, is only preliminary. It's 1 year of data. Did they collect it properly? But there's something like the number of people in the US, apparently one in 8 people in the US are on these drugs. 1 in 8 is what I've heard, which is a lot of people.
So we have hit 2 o'clock. And I'm always very conscious that people have other meetings and so on. And there are more importantly, and non-alcoholic mince wine. The university is very emphatic. It's non-alcoholic mince wine. Non-alcoholic mince pies. So thank you very much to Naveed. Naveed for the mince pies and arranging the British Sign Language. I hope everyone online had a great time, and thank you everyone for coming along. I hope you've enjoyed another lecture, and we'll see you next year. So thank you very much. And obviously, you can pester Naveed for another question. That's fine. I'm going to have one. I have a tweet.